Tony Holmes at his shop. Tony rode his horse up from Oklahoma, started working at the Hereford Ranch, and then started doing work out there at the ranch, and then went into Western Ranchman Outfitters and had a shop in there, and then finally ended up on Logan Avenue. So I spent about 2 years working with him. It was the glory days of picking stitches and sweeping floors and scrubbing saddles and taking them apart and putting them back together. Wasn't allowed to touch anything new. It was all work, and I don't think anybody does that anymore. Maybe one or two throughout the world out there anymore will do that. Everybody wants to go right away into building, and that's the biggest mistake going. So I opened up my shop in Cheyenne, and I moved to Douglas and had it there for a while, and then the highway got busy and ran us out, so we decided to move. But along this journey here, I got to know Matt. We would judge down at the fair, Wyoming State Fair together. That was quite the experience of doing all those types of things. And then at some point, Matt decided he wanted to learn and go a little bit above where he was on building saddles. His type of saddle is totally different than what I was doing, and people look at something and go, well, they're the same thing. Well, they're not. He wanted to end up learning to build what I call a full bag of potato chips. Most everything nowadays is built on a production type method. They work, they do for people, but they're not like a saddle really should be built. They do it for cost wise, so somebody can come up and they can afford their $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 for those types of saddles. And there's some pretty nice looking ones out there, so they go through there. So our journey started there, helping Matt out, and we've got in through the program through the state of Wyoming, through the Arts Council. It's not a whole lot, but they encourage those types of things. You know, it's only like 5,000, which is a drop in the bucket for spending pretty much a year with him. He would come over to Grable, spend a week, 4 days, whatever, back and forth, and it took a year to be able to, actually it was 2 years for him to be able to complete this. Some places along the line there, I know that the things were a little confusing for him. He would walk away and do, because what he had learned is not his fault. It was just what he picked up. He had no really training along the way from anybody that really had spent a lot of time building. And what his saddles would do, they worked for people. But there were some things in there. The ground seat was just totally different than what he had. I know he was confused with that one. The horn wraps and the swell covers are all through those types of things. Things that he had never done before or seen. You know, within your 30, 40 years of trying to build saddles, you know, he was just piecing and doing together. So hopefully down the line, what I have shared with him, he can go ahead and pick it up and do it. So I'm going to have Matt say a few words now.
Thank you, John. I struggled. The way I got started was there was nobody out there that actually was putting on any sorts of classes on how to build a saddle. And so I bought a couple of books. It had lots of pictures. I'm a poor reader, and so they got lots of pictures I can see and do. Sit down and read, well, step one, you do this, and blah, 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 blah. I get lost in all that, so just show me a picture or describe what I need to do, and I can do that, you know. But anyhow, so that's how I got started. Well, actually, my dad and I, that's where the D&M Saddlery come in for my business. My dad's name was D.A. Ryan, and so we just did D&M Saddlery, and most of it was just repair work. And like John says, you learn a lot when you're tearing things apart and having to fix things up, and you're trying to make it look like it's supposed to look. And so you learn a lot by taking these saddles apart, seeing what's underneath them, and but it leaves a lot to be said on the construction of it from step 1 through step 150, you know. And so I was missing a bunch of those steps in there. And everything has to work in sequences, because you can't go from step 5 to step 35 and have a product that turns out looking good. If that makes sense to you. But anyhow, so I'm real bashful, and so I got to meet John. I just walked up and told I think the first time I met him, I said, "Would you like to trade cinch keepers?" And so I fixed up a cinch keeper, which is this thing here on the side, and or latigo keeper, I mean, and he said, "Sure." So I tooled up what I thought was a pretty nice one, and then he gives me his, and it like blows mine out of the water. But I was really glad to have his, and I thought, that's kind of a neat deal. You get see different saddle makers around the country and trade latigo keepers with them and kind of save them, put them up on board or something like that. So that's how I got to meet John when he was downtown in Douglas. And then him and I got invited to judge State Fair Leathercraft, and so they have 2 judges that judge all the 4-H leathercraft there. And John don't know it, but I learned a lot from John just judging, because he knocked a kid down because their coaster was not burnished on the back side. And what I say by burnishing is you've got the flesh side of your leather and it's rough, and to smooth that you wet that and use a little saddle soap, and then you rub that with a piece of canvas or a stick or something to get that flesh side to smooth out and be slick. And I knew that the edges had to be burnished. That was a no-brainer. But the backside, I never heard of that before. And so when I taught 4-H classes up here in Campbell County, that's one thing I told all the 4-H kids. I said, now, a lot of people won't tell you this, but you need to burnish the backside of your coasters and your belts and everything that's showing the flesh side, because there are judges that will knock you because you don't have that done. So that was a big thing that I learned from John, and I kept telling John every once in a while I'd run into him, I'd say, someday I'd really like to learn to build a saddle again. And so 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, John called me up, and he'd moved over to Grable by this time, and he says, "You still want to learn to build a saddle with me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." And he said, "Well, Wyoming Arts Council's got a grant out there," and he said, "We can apply for that, and if we get that, then they'll pay me to teach you, and you just have to furnish the materials and everything." Like, well, I'm ready. I'm all over that, But the distance between us created a lot of problems. And the other problem was, although I'd like to be a full-time saddle maker, I'm not, because my family and I are still engaged in ranching. We run a bunch of Black Angus cattle, and that keeps us pretty busy. So the winter time, from I'm going to say like November to the 1st of April, is when I spend most of my time in the shop. So when going over to John's, like John said, I'd be over there for a week or 4 days or whatever, and then I come back home, and it might be 2-3 weeks before I make it back over. But he'd give me homework to do while I was home, and I would have that done, and I'd get back over there, and he'd go over it, and he said, "Well, I don't like your horn cover." So anyhow, I said, "Okay, let's strip that baby off and redo it, because I want to learn how to do it right." And so we redid it, and anyhow, there were several parts of the saddle that went like that had to do them 2 or 3 times. But that's part of learning, and I'm almost 71 years old, and I always feel that knowledge is a very good thing to learn and have, and you get that by hanging around people that know and do a better job than you do. And so John's been a very good mentor on this saddle, and it's taken us a long time, like you said, 2 years, and but I feel like I've got a real good saddle here for an end product, and learned a lot. And meantime, while I was working on this one, I got in and built my daughter a saddle, and she started riding it at calving season this spring. She absolutely loves it. She said the seat was wonderful, and being brand new and stiff and everything, she said that thing has never sored me. And so this winter I'll be building my granddaughter a saddle, and she told me, she said, "Papa, you gotta put the same seat in mine as you did in Mom's." So anyhow, but I want to turn this back to John, because John has a lot of knowledge and history, and mine is more just babbling on. But I did bring some slides that we'll go through here a bit later on some of the steps going through building this saddle. And I've got tools, not all the tools, but some of the tools it takes to build a saddle on that table there and back behind me here. And the knives, I caution you, they are sharp. You can shave with them, so be very careful when you pick them up.
Why don't we just go ahead with the slideshow?
Okay.
We'll talk about that,
Okay.
have those in there.
This is the first slide here, and so we have the tree that's in this saddle, and those of you that don't know what a tree is, it's a framework of your saddle, and I've got one right back here. Yep. And so it's wood and rawhide covered, and there's 4 parts, actually 5 parts to the saddle. There's 2 bars, that's these parts here. There's your swells and your horn and your cantle board, and those are all cut and put together, and then they cover that all with rawhide and stitched around with rawhide lace, and so that's your framework. So John and I, we took all these paper patterns, and we put them on the saddle, and we backed off across the room. And that's another thing I learned is sometimes you gotta back away and get a further look at things and see whether it looks good to you, whether it's balancing out or not. And so it's kind of hard to see, but all those paper patterns are sitting on there, and kind of gives you an idea what the saddle kind of going to look like. And then after that, we start laying those patterns on the leather and start cutting all those patterns out on the leather. But it takes a lot of time, and John was showing me that, you know, you gotta put that pattern on there, and there's certain parts of the hide that you can put a pattern on, that, like if you're gonna do swell cover, it's gotta be a part of the hide that will allow you to stretch and mold. And other parts has to be stiff and rigid, so you have to find those areas. And then you gotta be careful, because some of the canneries are, when they've skinned the animal, sometimes they'll make a knife cut into the hide, and so that makes a weak spot in your leather, and so you gotta stay away from those areas. Whoop. So I'll let John talk about these things.
And one thing back through the leather, the difference between what I'm doing and what a lot of people do is I'll use 3 sides of leather, a cow and a half, where most people will just use 2. And I saw a video the other day of a guy cutting his parts out, and I thought, okay, whatever, but they were all in the wrong spot, is where they were, pretty much. He did not have them correct. He builds a production saddle, builds quite a few of them. But the shop that I came out of, you didn't do things like that. You either did it right and it's trained into your brain, and probably that's one of the biggest things. Matt was left-handed, so it's tough to get his brain to think like mine and work it through there. But also too, I had to train his brain all over so he could actually build a saddle. I would play some Mozart music, and he thinks it's kind of funny, but one day he walks over there and he looks at that computer and that music is going, and he says, "What kind of music is this?" I says, "Well, that's some Mozart." He says, "Well, I went to bed last night and that stuff was playing in my head all night." But it does work. It finally got him into what he needs to do. But this is a step right here. These called a bar riser. They're different than what most everybody would put in. What that's going to do is help protect the inside of that tree right there from moisture and dirt and stuff. Plus it gives something for that stirrup leather to swing on. There are very few people that even use those or even know what they're for. Most of the time all that's opened up and is buried. And this is the gullet. It's the cover through there. There again, there'll be a lot of people that will just take the top of that on that grain side and skive it down and leave it real rough instead of taking it like it was, smoothing it, fitting it, and making it work, fit in there.
And that's the back side of it.
But you have to pull, shape, and fit. Well, all those tacks would be pulled out, and that'd be trimmed, and all that would be glued in. Whether you used a water type of a paste, or if you used something like barge or master cement. And I still use a lot of that water-based powder. It's really good stuff in certain places.
And that's with the bar covers glued down now.
You can see it.
Do you use the same weight of leather?
No.
Or do you use like a 8-9 ounce or?
No, we'll use the same leather.
Oh,
you just gotta
you
work
skive
it
it
out, yeah. And I don't really like splitters. Some splitters are okay, but problems with splitters is that they can be so finite and so, I don't know what you wanna call it, but as that leather gets going through there, sometimes it compresses it too much, and you end up with a piece that is too light. So I always usually take everything down by hand with a knife. Use one of these. Head knives, I'll use that, take that down there.
So you're working the leather.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and of course you gotta have it wet to do that. Makes it easier to, when it's cutting, because you're going along through there. You know, you're moving that way and pulling that leather up.
Have you ever tried to stretch it?
Yeah, these would be kind of stretched on, or that other piece would be stretched. I do a lot of pre-stretching though too. Use a little slicker. I don't see one. Stretch and pull those fibers down and compress that leather a little bit to start with.
You don't, put water on it to soften it to form that, do you?
Yeah, you've gotta have that water.
Okay.
Without the water and the glue, you can't build anything.
Okay, okay,
Well, they do what they call casing,
right,
and so that's where you wet the leather and you, not saturate it, but you wet it pretty good. And then you put it in, like a plastic bag and ziplock it shut and let it set for a few hours and let that moisture work its way through all the fibers.
okay.
And this is what we call a metal strainer. would order some trees once in a while from people, and then they go, well, you need a strainer for that. And I thought, no, I just cut my own. And I, like an idiot, until the internet came along, I thought everybody cut their own. No, nobody knows how to cut it. They just buy them pre-stamped out, pre-shaped, and that's what they use. Matt was kind of astounded how cutting this out and then taking a hammer and forming your shape for that ground seat to start with. And then you can see the metal strainer sitting in there. It's nailed in.
Right. There's nails along the edge right there.
And then we kind of jumped a little bit. Now we're into the rigging, which I put my rig down first. A lot of people will save that rig for later. What that does is allows that stirrup leather to slide right up over the top of that rigging, and you'll get a full movement out of it. If you go to most saddles, a lot of them they're built today, they're just right about there. That's about as far as that thing's gonna go. But this way I build it, I can move that if you need it. Not to say that you need it every day, but you can go back and forth and swing there. Part of the things that have been lost with a lot of people that try to build stuff nowadays.
Starting on the ground seat.
Yeah, and this is what we call our ground seat. We've got our rig put in, it's stitched in, it's double lined, the rigging's put in. That is probably, must be about the second piece maybe
Yeah.
for the ground seat. And with those ground seats, shape them in with heel shaves. You can even take spoke shaves and work them over a little bit. This one might be a spoke shave, but hill shaves have a lot of different curves to them in that. And there again, it's probably about the last piece. He's got the hole cut there up front right behind the horn. But this is where, when putting the ground seat in, you have to spend a lot of time there. And I tell Matt or tell anybody, you're not done until you're really done. You can sit there and you can feel all kinds of little bumps and bruises through it, and you spend a lot of time through there. And you get it down to where you put sandpaper and you work that out and make it as smooth as you can to put that in there. My ground seats usually take a week or more to put in. I've known guys that say they'll put their ground seats in a half a day or so. Which, you know, they're into the production end of it.
And the thing about a ground seat is most of that leather's wet when you're putting it in. And so you're skiving it down and then as it dries, you think you got it pretty smooth when it's wet. Well, then it dries and you'll feel hills and valleys in that seat. And you've got to work all that out. And you notice right here, you can see part of the seat strainer there. But that, you got to get that down close to them bars as you can. Otherwise, you're making that wider, and it spreads you apart. And you want to be sitting more in this area here, not necessarily clear back here. Your seat should just make you sit right about in there. And but like John says, you can spend days, because you'll work on it today and you think, well, I about got that, and then go back the next day and here you feel a whole bunch of bumps or valleys. Or you take a picture and you send it to John and he'll circle stuff and send it back to you and say, I need to work on this.
And that seat is pretty important as far as balance. Everybody, like Matt says, they will try to build a saddle and push it clear back into that cantle, which actually is not the place where you should be riding. The cantle isn't there for you to rest against. The cantle is there for you for sliding out the back end. It was never meant to be a resting area back there. If you'll notice too, when somebody gets on a horse bareback, where are they going at? They're going forward as far as they can. If anybody really knows how to ride when they're getting on that, if they're trying to push themselves to the back, they're in the back end of the bus. And that horse actually has a harder time moving and doing and will get a lot tired. So you try to move that person as far forward as you can without being, you know, too far out of the balance of things when they're sitting in that saddle. Just a different type of view. I think probably the handhold or getting it ready to go ahead and put a thin piece of leather over the top of it. There is into his horn. And that's called the horn wrap. It's one of those things that I'm very particular on how that wrap ends up being around that horn. I don't know if you can see it, but this portion here, the swing that comes around here, a lot of them will kind of take this here, but I like this wing to come up and go straight down right off of here, so it lines up and goes through there. And I always pull those things down. You can call them a Dutchman or a Chinaman or whatever, but you gotta go like this and wrap that thing and get that horn pulled down. And that's the filler. You always have to tack that filler down, because when it's stitched together, give you something on that horn so it doesn't sit there and move on you. Now he's getting ready to do the top, the wrap itself. There. You can see that line there on the wing. Yeah, right there. That's the other one that will come around. It'll make a line right in there for that thing to work right into it. So when you glue it, it fits right in there. It's all nice and smooth. And this is what we call blocking. You block those skirts in. What it does is hold those in place, keep them to where they're off a horse's back. If you'll notice that spot where it stops, and then there's a gap in there, that's for that stirrup leather. As it comes around under there, it leaves a little void in there, so it's got room. And I've seen too many people go ahead and just block that skirt all the way through. And they'll stop that stirrup leather right from even having any movement at all. And this is a toughie on the swell cover. It's a big stout piece, and it's on this saddle here. I think Matt was probably ready to give up on it several times, but we just hung with it, and we got a bigger hammer, and we took more time with it, and we finally got it put in. Because you end up with a great big, you know, pucker sticking out like this, and you've got to do something with that leather. You know, you could give it up and gone and found another piece, but no, we hung in there and probably spent a half a day or more. Got it pretty good, and then the next day up in and finished it off. But no, it's a lot to move. You have to have patience with it and strength. You find different ways of pulling it and stretching it and putting it the place that it needs to be.
That's the,
That must be the filler for the back.
yeah.
And I like a filler on the back side. There's some that will put those on the front, and that ends up here, strengthening here on these bindings, those Cheyenne rolls, common camels. And you can see there that it's got a camel back. The filler's already shaped in and cut.
And it's got all these puckers here. And,
Now what he's gonna do there, we've got some lines drawn, we're gonna take some of that out of there to bring that in, because if you don't do that, that thing's gonna go like this on you. You gotta be able to take some of that out of there, so those lines there will be cut and they will pulled together and then be stitched. And there's the stitch there, which helps strengthen the overall cantle binding.
Do you stitch it to the back, piece on the cantle?
Yes,
You do?
yeah,
Okay.
on that, yeah. Yeah, and I even, I do something that Matt had never even seen before too.
I think I got a picture of it.
Oh, okay, well, we'll get to it here then. That's his seat, he's got that, he's got the swells. One other thing too is this welt here. I use some sole leather nowadays that, they use for shoes. I will split that down and put that in there and rub them and slick them down for those welts in there. Ends up really nice, cause if you go over to that one, you can see how fine that is and how well it's pulled together.
Just another picture there. Oh, this is the weld.
Yeah, that's the welt there.
Gluing it in there.
Okay, and we tack it in after we've got it glued, and you've got 1/8 of an inch there to stitch in with. You want 1/8 out, and then you've got 1/4 on the other side that's gonna be trimmed. And I always do it by, stitch it by hand, I don't put it on a machine. You just can mess things up pretty fast with a stitcher. Okay, and this is, we're trimming that welt. I don't know if Matt had ever seen this technique as far as trimming those. That knife has got to be, as it's coming on that one side, you've got to angle it. So then the other side is angled too, so you've got yourself a point where that starts to, where your 2 points have come together where you cut it. Then you can take your knife and come down and make a flat cut and work that welt so it's gonna lay up against your saddle nice and neat on the inside. Because this is the inside, so when that, after it gets stitched and put together, you gotta turn it.
There's what it looks like once you turn it and get it set on there.
And he's got the swell probably glued and tacked down, and that's one thing with those swells. Swells take a lot of time on and off to make them really fit and work. You just don't put it on and make it do. There's some cuts right up under there onto that handhold that are very precise that you want filled in. You don't want big gaps in there for moisture and various things, dirt and stuff to get down in through there.
Get more to it on the swell cover. Oh, here's stitching in that plug.
And that's a little plug there, because when you cut that seat, it's got a little bit of area about so big, so you gotta cut a piece and fit it up in there and stitch it and glue it. If you didn't do that, then you'd have a big old dent right there.
Rear jockeys.
Yeah, these are the back jockeys, pattern. Always cut those patterns a little bit bigger. You can fit them, make them work.
So this part right here, this little dip right there is, where your, channel comes down, so it fits up into where your, channel cover and your, jockey comes together. There's no gaps in there, it all fits in there nice and tight. What you're trying to do is keep as much dirt and moisture out away from your tree. Or cutting them like a 1/4 inch on each side.
Yeah, and here's another little thing that Matt had never done. He always tried taking too much off of the front of that back jockey and hoping they would pull in. And he'd never seen the simple thing of just taking a 1/4 inch on each side and a point there.
Mhm.
Yeah. right there, and cutting inward towards that, taking that off, so you got a 1/4 inch going down to nothing, both sides, and that brings it together. Then, when you put it in and stretch it around there, it'll come up and fit tight.
Now, when you build a saddle, see how that leather work is also done? Do you also do leather work, or is that a separate skill? I know Matt does that. You know, the decoration of the leather.
Yeah, it's a separate skill, but yes, I do that. yeah.
Okay.
Actually, John does a way better job of floor carving than I do.
What?
He's a pro at it.
Oh, I didn't know we called it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a carving.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Some people call it stamping, but it's actually a carving.
Yeah, okay.
It started years and years ago, through California, come up through Mexico, from Spain, from North Africa. But they'd take a knife and cut it, and then a lot of the background stuff, they would actually take a knife and cut it down. But then somebody developed some other tools along the lines of mashing it down and gave the background off of it. I guess you would call that maybe the negative areas.
Did you, when you do for your patterns, do you hand draw them yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have several different types of flowers that I use and various things. This one over here's got fairly big flowers to it and some basket into it. But I have things that are smaller. Now, when I worked for Tony in his shop, his was pretty much all southern type of stuff. He probably built a better saddle than came out of Sheridan from King's, but he never had the finesse of the carving that they had up there. His things were bigger and, they had a 1950-ish look all through up till his death. Okay, so on the right, I had asked Matt to do a drawing of what he wanted this saddle to look like and put it away and not look at it until it was done. So, as you can see,
I'm not a very good saddle drawer.
but it's there though. There's a saddle and it's pretty doggone close to what he ended up wanting. He had to put the vision into his head before he built it.
That's where that music come in.
Well, yeah, but if we'd have him, we'd be singing the prison blues.
Yeah. So is there any questions? That's the end of the slideshow, so.
How much oiling and staining and how long does that all take? I'm sure there's a lot of that involved.
Well, I've gotten rid of the oil. I still use some oils because what happens when you put oil, it will blotch. It will be a dark spot and it's like, you gotta put everything out in the sun and try to get everything blended together. And so I use Lexol anymore, which is a conditioner. You see, I use that with a lot of repair work. Instead of using the needs foots, I went to that. It'll just make everything light, and then you can add some color to it. You can add color to it if you want to. It's kind of a milky looking type of a liquid, where the other is clear, the needs foot. So yeah, and it helps, I shouldn't say speed it up, but if you really want good color, it takes a long time to sit there within a couple week period or longer to get the color to match and to do. Matt had that problem even onto this saddle. He says, well, I can't get it even. Well, sunlight, when you were working a piece and having it out all the time, is darkening it where all the other pieces were put back, covered up, and then brought out, and they were the last ones to be done. So they're gonna have to take a different color than the first few pieces.
Where at in the process do you do the artwork on the saddle, your stamping or your recalling it?
You just do that as you progress. There are certain pieces that have to go on that saddle, so they have to be done. You've gotta get that done, like that seat has to be done before you stitch the cantle lining on. The swell cover, you can kind of later maybe. You know, there's various things, but you just progress and do it as you build the saddle pretty much.
And I've never sat down and cataloged the hours that it takes to go into a saddle. I just go down in my shop and I just sit down and go to work, you know. But I did keep track of the seat, just the seat alone, there's 36 hours of carving there,
Just the carving of it.
just the carving of it.
Yeah, and basically, I would have to say most saddles, due to inflation now too, are very underpriced. They're probably a very, very good value. You know, I basically would think, you know, if a person were getting that 30 or 40,000 off of his saddle, would be a minimum of where they should be if you're really building it. I was told years ago that this guy thought that really nice saddles ought to be up to $250,000, $300,000 in order to have it. Because basically it is no different than a flat piece of work that sits on the wall that they call a painting. That the guy can spend a few hours to it, create it, do it, you know, and $100,000. And he has not as much time or skill, I shouldn't say skill, but different skills into the set of it though. You know, and I think if there are a lot of younger people now that are wanting to do this, but there's a lot of what not to do out there. And what really is going to be done is what's going to happen is in the next 50 years, if it is not taught in the correct way, it'll be lost, it'll be gone. And it'll go downhill from there.
It'll all be production made.
Well, they're still producing, they're producing that now, but even that will even be reduced.
If you learn bad habits, bad habits get worse.
What's that?
If you get bad habits, gonna get worse.
Yes, yeah, it is, yeah. You know, and there are some people, their mindset when they're buying that, the horse world is kind of a fickle place, cause you got so many that are, you know, they're 10 acres or 15 acres or 20 acres and they have a horse and they have this idea of what a saddle should be, or maybe they have a trainer that's telling them, oh, you need to do this or have that, and the trainer doesn't even know. So it's just a matter of that you do what you can do. So Matt came along, so I helped him out. You know, I had went down to the university to teach in Laramie at the visual arts department. Had 20-some kids over 2 days learning how to carve. They had never ever experienced anything like this before. They were younger and older and they just picked it up and went after it.
Do you do classes like that here?
No, I don't. I'll do some in Cody, or if you want individual types of stuff, you can come to my shop. Yeah.
And he'll place the mosaic on you.
What is a good
I took
homemade
ballet, it's
saddle
fine.
run nowadays? Off the top of your head, depending how fancy you wanna get and log it up, but,
Well, you know, I'll start the saddle at 12,000.
okay?
You know, it could go 26,000, 25,000, depends on the carving
Okay.
and stuff to it.
Good.
You know, with Matt, I don't know where he was before, but I kept telling him that if you're gonna do this, you're gonna have to charge more. And when he starts charging more, he eliminates, I don't know how many people out of that. Because their wallet is determining it and the economics of it says, no, we can't do that. Or their knowledge in their brain says, why would I pay that? You know, this looks the same way as that does until they sit in it and ride it, or if they know the difference. That's where you gotta keep working on it. So Matt hopefully will, you know, be charging more. You know, I've had to teach him a lot about on that stuff. I sat down and figured one time in the shop, he had a pair of shafts that he had built. He showed them to me. So we had that discussion on price, which is very, very important. Because, you know, why shouldn't you be able to have the same thing as somebody else? Sure, you gotta put a lot of time and work into it, no doubt about it. So he told me how many hours, and I figured out, okay, Matt, you're probably, what, making $15 an hour or less. So why do that? Why spend your time at 15 an hour? Heck, you know, might as well go flip burgers at McDonald's if you're gonna do that type of stuff. So he was so afraid to charge what he thought he was worth. So he finally made the decision of charging more. And he goes, I didn't even bother him. They paid it anyway. You know, and he, you know, what do you do? Triple it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go
How
ahead.
many hours on average do you have in a saddle?
You know, each saddle's different.
Yeah, but.
Some go
there-
smooth, some others don't.
Are you talking weeks or months?
Yeah, you're talking months.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's dry time in it. There's guys that'll put a saddle together in a week. And it's wet, all wet, because it's not totally dried. Glue can't be totally dried. But yeah, you know, if you're considering I'm taking at least a week just on the ground seat, putting that in.
Wow.
Explain the difference on the bars. Like I know there's quarter horse bars for quarter horse, like I read a mule. I read about mule bars.
And a mule bar is just a flat bar, just flatter, because most mules are flat backed. Quarter horse, if you go back into the old catalogs, Standard or any of those tree makers, everything was set on 90 degrees. Which is this angle here. So if you're split through here, that's 45 there, that's 45 there, so that comes up to 90. And they built that 90 degrees on regular semi-quarter horse and quarter horse bars. The only ones that changed were full quarter horse. And they moved this area here out, you know, maybe to 7 or 7.5, depending upon where they needed it to be. They didn't get extreme like nowadays. I've seen them to where they're so upset because they only build trees that, I don't know, 93 degrees. It's like, when you sit there and you look at those degrees, just go look at one of those things. Those degrees are very slight. There's hardly any difference there. The leather's gonna make a whole lot of difference versus that degree. Now I've got a horse, he's a gypsy banner. His name's Tank. He's about 1,400 pounds. He's just a little draft horse is what he is. Very short back, he's got this to him, plus he's broad. His back regular is 130 degrees. These trees don't fit, don't even come close. So I finally convinced a tree maker to build one, and it ended up at 120 degrees. And the only problem with doing that, fitting a specific horse, is that horse could die tomorrow. It's a fact, doesn't matter. That saddle's no good until you find a horse that it might come along to. You know, but some of those gypsy banners now are, you know, they're 100,000 or 120,000 or whatever what they are.
That was gonna be my question, is that, it's like you're gonna make a saddle for your granddaughter, and of course you'll kind of make it smallish for her, right? But you also make something, account for the size of the horse. That is, you
Yeah,
know,
most,
it's gotta fit the horse.
yeah, I'm gonna grab this other mic.
See if it's on.
Maybe it's not on. Anyhow, what were you saying? So, usually most people, a quarter horse bar will work on most horses that are ridden today. Unless you get into what, like John's talking about, his horse. And some people will have a saddle made specifically for a certain horse.
Yeah.
And anyhow, but they're not, I don't know how to say this, but anyhow, they're not good quality handmade saddles. I mean, they'll buy a saddle that will fit this horse, and then they'll buy another saddle to fit this horse, if that horse's withers is really broad, then you gotta have a tree maker that's gonna specifically make a tree to fit that horse. But as an average, usually quarter horse, or you can go full quarter horse, and it's just a little wider in the gullet. And so instead of 6 3/4, it'd be a 7 or 7 1/4. And then you've got gullet height. If you got a horse that's got a high, sharp wither, you want like an 8-inch gullet in there, so that that gullet's not rubbing on the top of his withers. And if you got a more rounded back quarter horse, then you can probably get by with maybe a 7 or 7.5 inch gullet. And that's the height of the gullet there. But you want to make sure that that saddle's not rubbing on his back, you know.
So when you make a saddle for a person, do you have to go see their horse too?
Well, most people come and they've got a pretty good idea of what they're wanting. But then you ask questions as a saddle maker. You ask them questions of what kind of horses you're riding, you know, what do they weigh, those kind of things, and kind of gives you an idea. But I mean, if you want to get really technical, they've about got to load the horse up, bring it to you, and they make jigs out there. Some tree makers will make a jig, you can buy them, and you just set this tree on a horse's back. It's got a whole bunch of wing nuts, and you just loosen these wing nuts up and spread the bars out, do whatever you got to do to it, set the wing nuts back down, and then you can take all your measurements off of that jig and get the tree, you know. But the other part is having a tree maker that will actually do what you want it to do, and that's what John's run into over the years, is finding tree makers that will actually build a tree the way he wants a tree built. And but you know, was talking about prices, and John and I was talking that, you know, $14,000-15,000 for a saddle or more, and people pass out or almost pass out when you ask that price. But then they'll go down and buy a $90,000 dually pickup, and the darn thing only lasts 5-6 years, you know, and then they pull a $60,000 trailer, and they want to Jew with you on a saddle, you know, and a saddle is going to probably last them their whole lifetime if they take care of it, you know. I still got my dad's saddle. It was made in 1955 in Sheridan, and it's still a good saddle. It's part of my little museum that I have in my shop down there. But anyhow, you know, you take care of that stuff and it'll last. And
Let me ask on, you know, nowadays you're seeing a lot of draft crosses become popular. Would you still use that same tree, or would you know, because, you know, a lot of them are a lot heavier than a standard quarter horse. They're wider on top and whatever.
Well, that's what that Gypsy Banner is. So yeah, he had to have that something special to him. And that's the problem, when you start building a saddle for one horse, that's it. So if somebody comes to me and they want a saddle built, I'm gonna try to make sure that that saddle is fitting various types of horses through there.
Right.
Unless it's just gonna go to the house and sit and be as a showpiece.
So a lot of these packers, you know, you're getting more and more into the draft crosses.
Right,
So
yeah.
these quarter horse saddles are.
Some quarter horse, yeah, full quarter horse will fit them,
Okay.
yeah.
I think one thing too, how many people know how to put a saddle on and say, yes, this fits, or no, it don't. I couldn't tell you, I know that.
Well, that comes back to the education within the horse industry of how there are so many different opinions on it.
Right,
And that's all they are, opinions. You can just go on YouTube and see this guy's doing it this way and this guy's doing it that way. You know, same way with blankets and pads. Some will very big old heavy pads under there, which are ridiculous, you know. Used to be just a caracal blanket and a wool blanket, and that's all they needed. But nowadays, it's no, we gotta over pad it, so therefore that tree does not fit right on that horse, and it'll sit up there and rock.
Kinda like wearing winter socks in your boots. They get tight. Any other questions?
So a horse will know if it's got the wrong saddle on
Very much.
it, let you know?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, even if the tree's broke, they'll buck, they'll pinch him. Yeah, if you put one on, I had a tree built by a guy. And then I had a horse that just would buck. Got bucked off several times, and I finally put a different, cause all I had was a blanket, but I put a little 1/2-inch pad underneath it, stop it from there. But I got rid of the horse though. But I did notice it a little bit on some of the others that they would do it.
Do you ever study the older saddles, like say our collection? Is there value in that? Can you learn from examining those?
Yeah, there again depends upon some of the makers in that. There's some very good makers out there as far as that. You know, when I worked in that home shop in Cheyenne, we restored a lot of the meanie saddles from Cheyenne. Had collectors and bring those in, and you could see how those guys built that type of stuff.
you, take the production line saddles, like you can go buy at the feed store and stuff like that. And 99.9% of them will all have cushion seats in them. And there's a reason why they do cushion seats. And one thing is they'll throw scrap leather into that ground seat. And it's not planed down with you know, to get it nice smooth ground seat. And I gotta get rid of this. Ringing in my ear. But anyhow, also these outfits, they got big clickers, and when I say clickers, they're a press, and they've got a die the shape of the seat jockeys, and so they'll lay a piece of leather on that clicker and put that die on there and press that through, and then they'll turn their leather over and put that die on top of the leather again and click that out. So they've got the right and the left side all made there. So then they just join it at the front. They'll skive that down and join the two pieces together, sew that, and then they throw that cushion seat in there. So it's covering up a lot of humps and bumps, and then they use air nailers, ring shank air nailers, and I tell you, I hate ring shank nails when you go to repair them, because when you go pulling that out, them nails out, you're pulling chunks of wood out with the nail, and so then you got to go back in and use wood pegs and plug them holes, and it's a lot of work and to repair one of those, factory-made saddles, but that's why they do that, is because they can use big clickers, and they only use maybe 2-3 different styles of trees, and, they know, and they've got the dies to fit all the trees that they're doing, so, that's why they can production line them things through, and they don't spend any time in building them really.
Doesn't your work take a toll on your hands, cause it's such handwork?
Well, John doesn't, but mine, I've got, I'm left-handed, as he pointed out. I got a big joint on this knuckle here and another one back in here. And, yeah, it's from pushing those head knives through the leather and skiving, because I do all my work with my left hand. And, but as long as I can still play my guitar, well, okay. Anybody else got any questions? Well, I sure thank you. We brought, samples, John brought his album and a saddle, and I got some. This isn't all the tools that it takes to build a saddle, but there's some of them, and there's some there and some over here behind John. I've got all the paper patterns that I drew on for the design work on this saddle back here, so it kind of gave you an idea how much time I spent drawing. And DJ, she sits with me on the senior board, and she watches me doodle during the meetings. So, anyhow.
Well, I think we should give them all a round of applause.